Coming to you live from Darshan Studios, it's Zinc Comics Unleashed with your host, Brian Payne. That's me. I actually amended my original intro to include that phrase. The show's live from Darshan Studios. I self-published Zinc Comics under the Darshan Studios imprint, yet originally Darshan Studios Comic Art Museum and Storytelling Theater was located in the real world at 3819 6th Avenue in Des Moines, Iowa. Sadly, I sold the place over 10 years ago. I've tried to recreate the spirit of my old art gallery in cyberspace, however, and on Facebook with a perpetual online group show. Some of my Facebook friends join me in this effort and share their original work up on our infinite wall as well. This broadcast is a logical next step for Darshan, methinks. Without further ado, let's see who's hanging out in the studio tonight. Romper, Bomper, Stomper, Boo, tell me, do. Magic Mirror, tell me today what all my friends have to say. I see Dean and Carson. I see Steve and Bianca too. And here's Johnny. Finally, we got Jeff G, not to be confused with John G. Okay, Warriors, come out to play. Everybody all right?
Yeah. We're all right. So what's the subject, man?
Yes, sir.
Well, I don't like to have a set subject, but I do feel like I got to introduce you all to each other. And I feel like Steve and Bianca didn't get quite as much play. In the first show, we definitely kind of got an idea of what Dean does, and we kind of got an idea of what Carson does last show. So right off the bat, I want to talk to Steve. Steve, recently you've been crowding the restoration of your early Rabbit Hell mini comics. How's that coming along?
Yeah, okay. I just ran the second Kickstarter, and I'm trying to get to work on the actual restoration end of things for that one.
And why do they need to be restored? Can you go into that a little bit?
Well, because originally when I put them out, they were just in mini comic form. So they were, Xeroxed, folded and stapled mini comics, that my then partner David and I made. And since then, publishing has gone digital. So if you want to get your stuff printed somewhere, you have to send them files, and none of that stuff has ever been scanned. So it's I have I think close to 200 pages worth of that stuff that need to be scanned, and it's a lot of work. So that's why I ran the Kickstarters to help take time off from work so that I can work on all the scanning and compiling, and some of the art is deteriorating too. It's the oldest stuff is close to 30 years old. Not quite 30 years old, but it's getting
How many issues did you do of Rabbit Hell?
I did 7 mini comics, and actually there's probably a couple other mini comics under different names, like spin-off titles and whatnot. And there's some stuff like called Apocrypha that never got published that I want to include. And ultimately, I want to put it all into a book.
Good deal. You also received a Xeric grant to self-publish Awakening Comics. Tell us about that, and tell us what the Xeric grant is and how you got it and what you did with it.
How I got it, I applied. It's funny. James Kachalka said I beat him out for that grant, but then because he applied the same year, I guess. Then a year or two later, I applied for a different grant that was much more like $50,000, and Charles Burns beat me out for that. So I guess it all evens out. But anyway, Awakening Comics was kind of an anthology series. Rabbit Hell was one of the stories in it. The idea was it was going to be an anthology, but it was all the stories were done by me. So, and the basic idea was that each of the stories had a different drawing style, and it would look like it was drawn by different people, but it was all drawn by me.
The one-man anthology is one of my favorite kinds of comics. Again, for those who don't know, the Zarek Grant was put out by Peter Laird, right? Correct? Yeah. The guy who created Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it was his attempt to give back to the comics community and give other people a chance to catch lightning in a bottle as they did.
Correct.
And I think all of us of a certain age applied for that grant. Steve is one of the.
I was turned down.
I was turned down. You didn't just beat out James Chikaka. But yeah, I always thought it was great that you got it and that you added your name to that list. And unfortunately, they're no longer doing that, correct?
Well, they're still around, but they're not doing comics anymore. They're doing other things.
Okay, the grants go to other things. Okay.
Yeah, specifically what at this point, but it's no longer comics.
Okay, you also won the Gene Day Memorial Prize for your comic chemistry.
Gene Day.
This book had a soundtrack CD as well. Tell us how that came about. And I've got the CDs here, and that chemistry CD, I really liked that. And I saw that Bianca's on it, and I noticed that your partner who helped you create Rabbit Hell co-wrote some songs and plays on it as well. Do you consider that a soundtrack to the comic, or do you consider it a concept album that goes with the comic? Or I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, you could describe it either way. I always describe it as a soundtrack.
Okay.
But the idea was that the comic is broken up into chapters, and the title of each chapter is the title of a song. So the song reflects what happens in that chapter. The mood of the song is reflective of what's going on there. And chemistry was about a relationship that went bad, and then it was told in backwards form. So you see the couple getting happier and happier as the comic and album progresses.
Were you doing them both concurrently, or did you do the comic and then record the record, or how did that work?
No, the comic, the comic came first. It was actually done a panel a day, and I started it when I was in the relationship, and the relationship ended before I finished the comic. I did a panel a day for a year, and so it's 356 panels and 32 pages.
I always thought that panel a day thing was really nifty, and then you worked your signature into each panel kind of too, so it was like each panel was a work of art that told a story over a year. And like you say, relationship backwards. I like that concept too. You also did the Paradox, which had a CD as well. In listening to that seemed more like a concept album tangent to the comic to me, whereas the others seem more of a soundtrack. Is that a fair assessment, or do I totally got it wrong?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure what you're saying, but
it seemed like one followed the comic story more, whereas the other one followed kind of told a different story that related to the comic.
Well, Paradox, it was definitely more Paradox. In that case, the CD came before the comic.
Okay.
And it was definitely more of a stretch to try and make the comic fit with the songs.
Okay.
So I would say it's probably less successful.
Well, I was thinking of it more as almost like a prequel, like it kind of sets the stage and then you read the comic and you're like, oh, yeah, okay, I get that. So anyway, those were the quick questions I wanted to ask you. Now I want to bring in you and Bianca are working on Comic Verse, correct?
Yes.
Say something so we get your nice icon into our feed.
Yeah, we're working on the Comic Verse. I just realized that our first the first published strip we have online is from 2012, which is crazy to think about.
If memory serves, I recall reading once that Comic Verse was originally conceived as a weekly strip for a local comic book shop site. Is that correct, or did I imagine that?
Yeah, that was actually earlier than 2012. So we do have stuff up there that precedes 2012 that is on that comic book shop's website. And I think I guess it started around 2010.
You know, you guys call your comic a rom-com, and I just figured out that meant romantic. I was thinking it was some technical science fiction term like rom-com, you know.
Or that Marvel character, right?
Yeah, well, that's just the way my head thinks. And then in preparing for the show, I was like, oh, well, that makes total sense. Now I get it. Okay, Bianca, who was the real instigator of your creative partnership, you or Steve?
I think, well, I walked up to Steve and I started talking to him because I was interested in him as a musician at this open mic that we went to. And I was reading my poetry. And then at that time, I was like, wow, you do comics. I have this idea about a comic with a dragon in it. And he was like, I'm not interested in that. And then so we started working on a different comic named Mida, which never really got published. But later on, he came to me and said, you know what? I figured out how to draw dragons. And at the same time, he wanted to put up a weekly strip for the Brave New Worlds website. And so that's how it was born. So it was really, you know, both of us and different ideas coming together to form the Comic Verse.
It was because it was on a comic book site. That's why you decided to do a comic book store in space.
Well, the original idea, the original concept was I wanted to do a strip that would appear in comic book shop newsletters, like, you know, nationwide. Sort of like comic shop news, but like, you know, digitally. And it just never worked out that way. But it, you know, that was the original concept, and it just grew from there and became its own thing.
Yeah, that would have been a great target audience, and I don't see why there isn't something like that. But yeah, that was a great way to try and get your foot in the door. And you know, too bad that the comic's great, and too bad it isn't appearing that way. Okay, we're about halfway through right now, so I want to kind of like work in the other fellas. And the reason I got Steve and Bianca work together in much the same way that Dean and Jeff work. So I thought that Jeff and Bianca would have a lot of similar stories to share. So we kind of got Dean talking about his artwork and how he worked with Jeff. If Jeff could talk about, we never really got to Boom, and Boom is what you're working on now. So could you tell us a bit about Boom, Jeff, and
Yeah, sure.
Also tell us how you work with Dean on it. And
I heard a bit of your conversation with Dean last time, so I got to make a correction real quick. We just happened to stumble on the part where he was talking about our earliest work together. And I think he mentioned that Moses was our first work, but we had actually done about, it's got to be at least 100 pages of comics probably. Before that, little short stories, short pieces.
Mini comics.
20 pages, 40 pages. Yeah, little mini comics type of things. From the very beginning, we made a handshake agreement. And like the gentlemen we are 15 years later, stupid gentlemen that we are, we're still working together and having a ball doing it. It's always been starting with a full script. So I'm writing like ridiculously detailed Alan-Moore-esque panel by panel, page by page breakdowns for Dean. And I might write a 30 or 40 or 50 page chunk. But once I give it off to him, he runs through the script, breaks it down however he wants, changes whatever he wishes. I'm not real attached to it in the way that, would get in the way of him making, powerfully, important improvements or changes in the approach or pacing. So it's a very loose, organic approach from there. Start real detailed and heavy with a full script, and then just back and forth between him sketching it out in a little sketchbook and thumbnails, and then producing pencil pages, me lettering those pencil pages in pencil before figuring out maybe even what the final product of the dialogue or the narration might be. And, we've done from a 600-page book almost to a 200-page book to a 20-page or even a 10-page short story. That organic back and forth, where by the time I'm inking the letters, inking the dialogue balloons, inking the captions, I mean, he's almost, he's pretty much the art end of it. I just clean up the art and maybe add some hatching lines or whatever. But with the lettering, I'm the one actually figuring out what finally is going to be put in these people's mouths, or the characters' mouths, or the narration captions. And he influences that hugely too. If a line doesn't work, if dialogue is too clunky or just it's not smart enough, Dean is an exceptional editor on almost every level. So by the time I'm inking those balloons or caption boxes, the writing itself has gone through probably 3 or 4 metamorphoses. And a lot of it's retained, a lot of the basic story structure or even dialogue or wording, a lot of it's retained, but I'm just not married to it. So it's so organic and evolves so much. It's just kind of like a dance we're doing for real. I probably talked a little bit too long there, but
that's fine. How does that relate to what you're doing, Bianca? Does that sound like the process you work with Steve in any way, or is yours totally different?
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting to listen to because our process is like really different. We start out actually talking about a concept together. Usually Steve starts out with like a loose concept, and then we do an outline together, and then I work from the outline, and Steve gives me freedom to elaborate on the outline. I've created characters. He gives me a lot of freedom in that sense, and then it kind of goes back to him where he might edit a sentence or two or add a sentence or two or say to me, can I change this word here or there? And we do that throughout the process of writing an issue where I don't write too far along before I send it to him and say, does this look good? Do you feel good about this direction that I'm going in? So yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty cool that you guys do it in such a different way, but probably come out with a really great result.
They've been together 15 years. How long have you and Steve been working?
Let's see. Yeah, I would say at least that long. We worked on different things before the comic verse, and we've been working on this for like 6 or 8 years, and before that it was Mida. So yeah, I have to think back about what year it was that we met at that open mic.
Okay, Carson, I have a feeling that your story about how you work with Sim might be a little different. Would you care to share that with us?
It really depends on which project and what part of the project we're working on. Like the first stuff I did with him, I kind of knew what he was looking for with the bridging sequence. Like, just someone closing up shop. And so I wrote my own version of how that would work based on what I had read of his book. So it's like I was writing what I thought Dave would want, and then went and photographed that and mocked it up and sent it to him, my version, and then he took that and totally rewrote it and remocked it up, but kept my premise. So a lot of that was done really visually. Like, this is a weird way to talk about writing, but the writing was done visually. So, you know, we're both artists. We communicate visually best, I think.
Chris Ware has a great quote about where the great thing about comics is writing while you're drawing. So I think that makes sense to me. Okay, talk a bit about how You Don't Know Jack came about. Is that a spin-off of, or was it just a continuation of that process?
Yeah, it was the character that we were using. The student I had, who was a comic shop manager that posed for it, we realized that she was a very interesting character on her own. And me and Dave just joked, like, it would be funny if we wrote Jack so well that everyone kind of said, well, Strange Death of Alex Raymond sucked, but that girl that was in the interstitial scenes, like, she was really good. She should have her own book. And so we said, well, then just as a joke, we'll give her her own prequel to a book that's not even come out yet. And then that one was even weirder because it was like, okay, we're going to take Jack's Facebook posts and then Dave's going to respond to them. And then they're going to go back to me and Jack to like undavify them a little bit and then go back to Dave because ultimately he's going to take control over the whole thing anyways. So that one was a real mess. It's kind of still a mess back and forth on it.
And now that you're working with on Strange Death of Alex Raymond, is he sending you entire mocked up pages for you to draw with the photographs and everything, or is that still a bit of back and forth?
Yeah, for that I'm basically just the replacement for his hand. So I get scans, like 600 DPI scans of these chopped up, cut and pasted photo montages he does. And then I basically just translate them into black and white. So that's entirely visual. I don't even need to know what's being said. I mean, it helps. He gives me some scripts so I understand what he's trying to hint at. And if I see there's a couple times where I've seen options to make a composition better, or I've found a better source image on a person than he has found, and I can rework that. But mostly now it's just me doing whatever Dave says. That seems to be what works best.
Okay, we're getting to almost 5 minutes in. This show's kind of a jumble. But I want to make sure we get Johnny Logan Harley in here. And since we're on the subject of Dave Sim, I know Steve did a From Hell book variation, and so did Johnny Logan Harley. So if Johnny, could you tell us a little bit about yours, and then maybe we can have time for Steve to talk about Yinging Hell as well.
Sure. What do you want to know exactly?
Well, just tell us the name of it, and you spoke to Dave to get permission. I know, and then tell us a little bit about your story and your work.
Okay. Well, what I wanted to do was show that a parody of time travel in my series Frozen Dead was affecting not just my comic, but yours, Brian, and Dave's, and Shannon Wheeler was kind enough to be involved with Too Much Coffee Man, and just show that one fictitious universe playing with the space-time continuum could affect everything. And I had called and left Dave a message like 2 years before I was even at that point in my storyline, and he had called me back within a half an hour, and we spoke as in depth as I could to give him, hey, I know you don't know who I am. I've been doing Frozen Dead since 1999. And I told him the concept. And again, he was just all for it because he says anybody can use Cerebus. So, but that being said, it was actually neat. He suggested so that he could be a part of it, since he couldn't draw, was to take actual Cerebus in Hell panels and rework and rewrite them to fit my needs. And like I said about Brian being involved, if you remember, you were the wrong number, where Cerebus goes on this quest to reach the panel's edge to scream into the other comic that's affecting his storyline to get the hell out. And by the way, it's Frozen Dead is based off of an old zombie movie, and we just stole the name. But the comic with Dave's work was Cerebus in Hell ... in Frozen Dead, just showing that he was being pulled into this black hole type void that I had created with my time travel story, so that I could make fun of stories like New 52 and Marvel Now.
There's links in the on the YouTube channel to all our artists' websites, so check those out. We got a little bit of time here, Steve. Could you talk a little bit about Yin in Hell and how that related to what Johnny just said?
Okay, I'll try to do it quick since I know there's only a couple minutes. Ours, yeah, as you said, it was called Yin in Hell, and it appeared in our comic, our spinoff comic, Subspace Chatter, which is the comic verse characters doing a podcast about pop culture and sci-fi and comics and whatnot. And so in our story, we had Ying the dragon going into Hell to look for Cerebus, to ask him if Cerebus in Hell is canon or not. And so we used the Duray woodcuts for the backgrounds, just like Dave did or does in Cerebus. And the basic idea was we would do each circle of Hell, and we dedicated pretty much a page or a half a page to each circle of Hell, and like researched each one. And Bianca just improvised each circle. Like we went with whatever theme of that circle of Hell was, and she improvised based on that. And then finally he finds Cerebus at the very end of the story. And the idea of that was kind of inspired by Apocalypse Now, where the guy's searching and searching for Major, whatever his name is. I can't remember.
Kurt.
Yes. And finally finds him at the end. And so he finds Cerebus at the end and asks him the question. And I don't want to give away the ending.
Right. Was Dave much involved in that, or he just gave you your permission and you guys ran with it?
You know, I didn't even ask him because I know he's okay with people using the character. And
okay.
I did send him the issue, and he told me that he considers the story canon, which is very, I really appreciate him saying that.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I know we kind of, some people got short shrift, but I tried to work you all in. And I think talking about the writing was really interesting. And I hope we can get Jeff and Bianca back to expand on that at a later date. And I knew that we had 3 creative teams. We had Dean and Jeff, we had Steve and Bianca, and we had Carson and Dave Sim. And then you got me and Johnny here for comic relief. So I thought it would be a good show. And our levels were a little off this week, I think, but I think we'll get it. As I keep saying, this is a learning curve, and we'll get it again next week. If we keep getting the same gang, we'll learn to talk amongst ourselves like friends at Thanksgiving, and that's what I'd like it to be, as a family. And I consider you my Facebook family, so I appreciate y'all joining in. And as always, remember, no matter what anyone says, comic books are important.